Okay, greetings everyone. Welcome. My name is Dr. Roblin Luter, and I am so very excited to welcome you all here today for the dissertation defense for Karma Hill. Karma has worked so hard and endlessly. I think she's been the most phenomenal student to work with. And she's already an expert and leader in her field, but I know her dissertation just takes it to the next level. She has conducted a very timely dissertation, and so I look forward to us hearing her defense today. I do want to go over just a few ground rules today. In a moment, I will turn it over to Karma, and she will formally introduce her committee. However, while she presents, so not until she starts presenting, but once Karma starts to do her defense, we do ask that everyone mute their cameras and microphones while she's defending so that the only person we should see or hear at that time is Karma. Okay, and now, Karma, I will turn it over to you for introductions.
All right. Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here today. I'm super excited. I'm honored to share with you the journey of my dissertation entitled Positive Psychology Coaching and the Reimagining of Leadership. It's a phenomenological study of African American women navigating burnout. I think this work is both deeply personal and profoundly necessary, and it sits right at the intersection of leadership, well being, and equity. And it also asks us not only how leaders survive burnout, but how they can truly flourish. Before we get started, I just really want to take a moment to thank my committee and introduce them. First, I extend my deepest gratitude to my chair, Dr. Roblin Luter. Your guidance, your wisdom, and just your steady support have been invaluable throughout this process. And I know I wouldn't be here today without you, so I thank you. I also want to thank my committee readers, Dr. Nasheen Pashazadi and Dr. Kiki Ramsey. Your thoughtful feedback, your consistent encouragement, and just the belief in the importance of this work has been, invaluable for me. And I know that I thank you. I would not and I could not have asked for a better team to walk alongside me on this journey. Y'all have been absolutely amazing, and I'm so excited to be here with you all. All right. So, just so we can kind of where we're headed today, um, we are going to start with just looking at the background and the problem statement, and then we're going to move to the purpose of the study and the research questions that guided my work. From here, I'll then outline the conceptual framework that shaped my study, followed by the methodology, the data analysis process. And really, the heart of this presentation will be the findings. I'll walk through the five major themes, and then I'll show how they connect back to the research questions. And then finally, I'll discuss the implications for coaching, organizations, and policy, and then I'll close with the contributions and conclusion. Honestly, my goal here today is not to just share the rigor of this study, but really to tell the story that of burnout, resilience, and really reimagining leadership. So we all know that burnout is not a new story. It's a global crisis costing organizations billions, but more importantly, costing people their health, their joy, and sometimes even their lives. For African American women leaders, the story is even more complex. The weight of race, gender, leadership responsibility, it all intersects to create a unique compounded stressor. What some call invisible labor or cultural taxation. And then, of course, came COVID-19, which did not create burnout by any means, but it magnified it in many instances. It exposed the fractures in our systems and made visible what was already unsustainable. For many leaders, it became a turning point, a moment of reckoning about what it means to lead and to live well at the same time. Traditional interventions often focus on surface level fixes, which are well intended, but the approaches don't address the deeper cultural and systemic causes of burnout. Despite the urgency of this problem, research has largely overlooked the experiences of African American women leaders. Burnout has been studied broadly, but rarely through an intersectional lens that accounts for both systemic inequities and cultural realities. Most wellness and burnout interventions, they kind of take a one size fits all approach. They offer stress management, mindfulness apps, or even yoga at lunch, but they often fail to address the intersectional realities of leaders who carry not only organizational demands, but also racialized and gendered burdens. This disconnect is echoed in the scholarship. As Lewis and colleagues 2016 reminds us, culturally responsive approaches are essential if we are to move beyond surface level solutions. This gap is where my study lives. It explores positive psychology coaching as a culturally responsive, strength based approach, not simply as a way to manage burnout symptoms, but as a pathway to resilience, wholeness, and a reimagined model of leadership. Specifically, I wanted to investigate how culturally attuned, strength based coaching could foster resilience, restore well being, and support leaders in re engaging with their roles, not from depletion, but from a place of authenticity and wholeness. To ground the study, I drew from two complementary frameworks, PERMA Plus and the Job Demands Resources Model, or JDR model. PERMA Plus was introduced by Martin Seligman and is the model of well being that emphasizes six domains: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, accomplishment, and the pluses for physical health. Together, these represent the building blocks of human flourishing. In coaching, these elements become very practical tools like cultivating strengths, deepening meaning, or intentionally building positive emotion. The JDR model was developed by Becker and Demaruti, and it explains how burnout occurs when job demands outweigh the resources that are available. But it also shows how increasing personal and organizational resources, which are things like support, autonomy, or resilience, and how that can buffer demands and enhance engagement. What makes these two frameworks powerful together is how they complement one another. PermaPlus offers the psychological building blocks for resilience and flourishing, while JDR gives us the structural lens to understand how demands and resources play out in leadership contexts. By integrating the two, my study was able to look at both the systemic pressures African American women leaders face and the restorative potential of positive psychology coaching to replenish resources, cultivate well-being, and sustain authentic leadership. This study was guided by one central question, which was, how do African American women leaders perceive the impact of positive psychology coaching on their experiences of burnout in the post COVID-19 workplace? To explore this fully, I broke it down into four sub questions. First, I wanted to understand the starting point, which was, how do these leaders describe their experiences with burnout prior to coaching? What did burnout look like and feel like for them? Second, I asked, how do they perceive positive psychology coaching's role in addressing those symptoms of burnout? Things like emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and reduced professional efficacy. Third, I wanted to know which specific approaches within positive psychology coaching they found most beneficial. For example, strength based practices, resilience building, strategies, mindfulness, or meaning focused interventions. And then finally, I asked, how has positive psychology coaching influenced their engagement, overall well being, and work life integration? Together, these questions provided a pathway moving from how burnout was experienced to how coaching intervened, to which practices made the biggest difference, and ultimately to how leaders reimagine their well being and leadership identities. To capture the lived experiences of burnout and the impact of coaching, I used a qualitative phenomenological design guided by Mustika's 1994 approach. This method was appropriate because my goal was not to test a hypothesis, but rather to deeply understand how participants experience and made meaning of positive psychology coaching. The sample included six African American women leaders, all at least 25 years of age, with more than 5 years of leadership experience, a history of burnout, and at least 3 coaching sessions that utilize positive psychological interventions. Data were collected through semi-structured interviews on Zoom, lasting roughly 60 to 90 minutes each. This format allowed space for participants to tell their stories in their own words while still maintaining a consistent structure across interviews. For analysis, I followed a systematic process. First, a poke where I bracketed my own assumptions to remain fully present with the data. Then, horizontalization, treating every statement as having equal value. From there, I engaged in open and axle coding following Strauss and Corbin's framework, and I used in vivo software to support organization. Through clustering, significant statements were grouped into categories, which then evolved into themes. These themes were synthesized into textual and structural descriptions and ultimately into an essence statement, which distilled the meaning of the shared experience. To ensure trustworthiness, I used multiple strategies, member checking, so participants could validate their interactions, and audit trail documenting my decisions, thick description, which enhanced transferability. These all align with Lincoln and Google's 1985 standards for credibility, dependability, confirmability, and transferability. Like with any study, this research has its limitations. The small sample size of 6 participants means the findings aren't generalizable to all leaders. But the strength of phenomenology lies in that trade off. It allowed me to actually go deep, capturing the richness of each individual's lived experience. A second limitation is that qualitative data depend on participants' self reporting, which can introduce recall bias or social desirability effects. However, participants spoke candidly about both challenges and growth, which strengthened the authenticity of their narratives. And of course, there's always the potential for researcher bias. I manage this by engaging in reflexive journaling and bracketing my own assumptions. On the ethical side, every step was guided by best practices. I received IRB approval and obtained informed consent from all participants. Data were securely stored and pseudonyms protected their identities. These strategies help safeguard not only the integrity of the study, but also the dignity and the voices of the women who entrusted me with their stories. Through rigorous analysis, 5 major themes emerged that captured the essence of how African American women leaders explore burnout and the impact of positive psychology coaching. The first theme was cultural dissonance. Leaders described feeling pulled between who they were and what leadership demanded of them. It was a misalignment of values, the pressure to overcompensate, and at times the suppression of their authentic selves. The second theme was invisible labor and emotional exhaustion. This included the unseen emotional load, the physical symptoms often ignored, and the weight of the strong Black woman schema. The third theme was coaching as a healing praxis. Coaching became a sanctuary, a space for journaling, gratitude, mindfulness, and authentic reflection. As one participant beautifully put it, journaling helped me write the story I needed to live. The fourth theme was authentic leadership. Through coaching, leaders gain self awareness and they learn to be emotionally present and set clear boundaries. And finally, redefining success. Participants moved away from checking boxes toward fulfillment, integration, and creating new models of leadership. Together, these themes reveal a journey from dissonance and depletion to healing, authenticity, and redefined success. So, why these 5 themes? First, they were not isolated or anecdotal. They emerged through convergence and saturation across cases. I saw consistency in the frequency of meeting units, but also in the intensity and the depth of the participant stories. These were not one off comments, they were patterns repeated with richness across all 6 women. Second, the themes aligned directly with my conceptual frameworks. Using PERMA Plus and the job demands resource model, I was able to see how participants' experiences mapped onto existing theory, creating what we call theory-driven triangulation. That strengthened the credibility of the analysis. And third, these themes were developed with phenomenological rigor. I stayed close to the participants' language, derived meaning from their lived expressions, and validated interpretations through member checking. Following Mustika's 1994 phenomenological method and Lincoln and Guba's 1985 criteria for trustworthiness gave me confidence that these themes truly represent the essence of participants' experiences. In short, these themes were not chosen by convenience. They were the clearest, most credible representation of what these leaders lived, felt, and ultimately transformed through positive psychology coaching. Now I want to take a closer look at each theme, not only in the participants' voices, but also in how they connect to the broader literature and frameworks. First, cultural dissonance. Leaders describe conflicting norms and expectations that created identity strain and decision fatigue. From the JDR perspective, these conflicts operate as job demands that increase the risk of cynicism and exhaustion. Positive psychology coaching offered a space to realign values and reduce that dissonance. The second was invisible labor and emotional exhaustion. Participants carried the weight of diversity advocacy, constant competence proving, and daily microaggressions. As Settles and colleagues 2021 and Wingfield 2019 have documented, this kind of invisible labor disproportionately depletes resources for Black women in leadership. Coaching provided strategies to replenish emotional resources and reframe energy drains. Third, coaching as a healing practice. Here, strengths based practices, mindfulness, gratitude, and meaning making supported optimism, emotional regulation, and alignment with purpose. These map directly to PERMA Plus domains of well being and illustrate how coaching builds psychological resources that buffer high demands. Fourth is authentic leadership through self awareness. Coaching helped participants clarify values and affirm identity, which reduced the cost of code switching and enabled more principled, congruent action. This shift echoes research on authentic leadership and demonstrates positive psychology coaching's role in identity affirmation. Finally, redefining success. Leaders describe moving from perfectionism to presence, from performance metrics to purpose. They spoke of coherence across self and role, and this shift was linked to improved engagement, energy, and professional efficacy. In sum, each theme is not only lived and voiced by participants, it's also supported by established research and theory, which strengthens the credibility and impact of these findings. All right, so now let me bring the findings back to the research questions that guided this study. The central question asks, how does positive psychology coaching impact African American women leaders' experiences of burnout? We see that clearly through themes 3 through 5. Coaching emerged as a restorative and identity affirming practice that supported healing, authenticity, and integration. Looking at research question 1, which was about pre positive psychology coaching burnout. Leaders described cultural dissonance and invisible labor, the pressure that left them emotionally exhausted and cynical. These were captured in themes 1 and 2. For research question 2, mitigating symptoms, positive psychology coaching provided resources that buffered these demands. Using the PERMA Plus model, participants developed positive emotions, stronger relationships, and deeper meaning. Resources that balance the high demands described in the JDR framework. For research question 3 was looking at the beneficial approaches. The strategies participants found most impactful included strength-based coaching, mindfulness, gratitude practices, values aligned goal setting, and the PERMA Plus routines. These were tools that made resilience sustainable. And finally, for research question 4, which was focused on the outcomes, leaders reported greater engagement, improved well being, healthier work life integration, and perhaps what I think is the most important, a redefined vision of success, one rooted in authenticity and coherence, not just output. Taken together, the research questions point to a clear conclusion. Positive psychology coaching doesn't just treat burnout symptoms, it reshapes how leadership itself can be practiced and sustained. So, what should we do with all of this information? First, for coaches, positive psychology coaching should be integrated into leadership development as more than just performance coaching. It can and should serve as a restorative practice. That means embedding PERMA plus routines like strengths use, daily savoring, gratitude journaling, and meaning reflection. It also means prioritizing identity affirming strategies that help leaders reduce cultural dissonance and reclaim authenticity. Secondly, for organizations, we need to recognize that positive psychology coaching is not just a perk, it's a critical job resource. From a JDR perspective, coaching replenishes the resources leaders need to balance heavy demands. That requires funding access to credentialed positive psychology coach trained coaches, building psychologically safe, equity centered cultures, and actively reducing invisible labor and cultural taxation. Just as importantly, organizations must align KPIs and performance measures with well being outcomes, not just output. And thirdly, for policy and programs, positive psychology coaching should be embedded into leadership pipelines and succession planning to ensure sustainability. We need systems to monitor burnout and equity focused data, create protected time and space for reflective practice, and fund longitudinal research on positive psychology coaching's organizational impact. This ensures that we're not only addressing individual well being, but also shaping leadership systems that can endure. In short, the findings from this study are not just descriptive, they are actionable. They call us to rethink coaching practice, organizational responsibility, and leadership policy so that wholeness, resilience, and authenticity become built in features of how we lead. This study makes several important contributions. First, to scholarship. It extends positive psychology coaching research into an understudied and intersectional context, which is African American women leaders navigating burnout in the post COVID-19 workplace. By centering their voices, this study fills a critical gap in leadership and coaching literature. Second, to theory. It offers a framework integrated pathway to combining positive psychology using the PERMA Plus with the job demands resource model. This integration provides a more robust lens for understanding racialized burnout and demonstrates how psychological resources can buffer structural demands. Third, it contributes to practice. The findings translate into implementable, culturally responsive strategies that coaching and organizations use immediately. From identity affirming coaching practices to equity centered organizational cultures to well being aligned leadership pipelines. And finally, it contributes to impact. This study reimagines leadership success itself. It positions wholeness, coherence, and authenticity as non negotiables for sustainable, high impact leadership, moving the conversation beyond burnout prevention to leadership transformation. In these ways, the research doesn't describe a problem, it builds a pathway forward for leaders, organizations, and the coaching profession. In closing, this study revealed a journey from overextension to coherence. Positive psychology coaching, when practiced with cultural humility and systemic awareness, is not simply a tool to manage burnout. It's a restorative, identity affirming practice that helps leaders reclaim authenticity, purpose, and wholeness. For African American women leaders, positive psychology coaching created rare spaces of affirmation and reflection, places where they could shed perfectionism, resist cultural taxation, and reimagine success on their own terms. More than symptom relief, positive psychology coaching offers sustainable resources, positive emotion, relational support, and meaning that buffer job demands, improved engagement, and sustained authentic high impact leadership. Ultimately, this research affirms that wholeness is not a luxury in leadership. It's the new standard, and positive psychology coaching shows us a pathway to make that standard real. This study affirmed that burnout for African American women leaders is not only personal, but cultural and systemic. And yet, through positive psychology coaching, leaders are able to reclaim authenticity, recenter on their values, and restore coherence between who they are and how they lead. So, the impact of this work extends far beyond symptom management. It points us toward a new model of leadership, one that is sustainable, equity centered, and rooted in wholeness. Positive psychology coaching is not just about managing burnout, it's about reimagining leadership itself. Before we move on to questions, I want to once again thank my committee, Dr. Roblin Luter, Dr. Nasheen Pasha Zaidi, and Dr. Kiki Ramsey, for your guidance, your support, and your commitment throughout this journey. Your insights have not only shaped this dissertation, but it also helped shape my growth as a scholar and as a practitioner. And for that, I am beyond grateful. So, with that, I turn it over to my committee for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karma. And Dr. Ramsey, wonderful. You can join us back. Thank you. So we will now begin our question and answer period. And I guess we can just do a round robin. I will allow Dr. Ramsey or Dr. Pasha Sadie to start, whomever wants to go first.
I can go ahead and get started if that's okay. I mean, first of all, this was amazing. This was very, very thank you so, so much for doing this work. It's such an important contribution, beyond even, what I think we can imagine at this point because of the impact that it can make over generations, this kind of work, right? So my biggest question, I think, is basically going off the way what your main purpose is, the reimagination of leadership. Based on your findings and the conversations that you've had, what do you think would be some of the major traits or major aspects of what positive leadership would look like or positive executive leadership would look like?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, just from the conversations that I had and, my own experience, I think that when we really center making sure that we are affirming leaders' identity and what they bring to the table, and that it looks different in the workspace, and that is coming from a cultural standpoint within the organization, not just that the individual is working to do that. So for me, I think that was the benefit that positive psychology coaching has, but I also think it's what can then be mirrored within the workspaces and organizations so that everyone, not just leaders, are experiencing that same um, affirmation, I guess, for who they are in the workspace, as well as aligning their values and what they bring to whatever role they're in.
Hey, that's great, and I appreciate that because I love identity related research to begin with. I think that's such a core aspect of pretty much anything that we can do in organizational psychology. But kind of moving to a little bit in the same vein of what you were just saying. Um, Given the political, climate as we see it right now, I'm in Texas, so DEI is a bad word, and so around the country, or maybe just in specific parts of the United States, how how do you think organizations should address this identity level, of of impact within their organizations when it's not necessarily looked upon as something that is even existent right now in politics.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So one of the things that I often, have conversations about because I think it's coming up in multiple places. So I'm in Georgia, so of course we have some of those same similar things as well, right? But I think diversity, and even if we looked at diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, I think it's has just those words, right? It's like we need to think about how we're embedding that in. And if we have the broader conversation of even moving past what those specific words or that acronym is, what does diversity look like within an organization, right? And we start having the conversations and looking at the practices and the policies that actually are adding value and what the benefit is. I think we can move past the misunderstanding that sometimes goes along with what diversity actually means. And I think for many of us, a lot of people don't really understand the true meaning of what diversity looks like, what inclusion really means, what equity actually is. And I think it's centered more at a very surface level, and it just raises a lot of fear versus really deepening. Even if we don't use the word, we could still be making sure our policies and our practices are diverse. And so I think that's more the way we need to go about it.
Okay, I mean, the last question I have just on this, and I'm gonna give it to Dr. Kiki next, because this is so interesting to me. Where would you start? At what level do you think we can start having those conversations? Does it have to start at the very top? And we all know that, at the very top, it's not very diverse um, in those spaces. So how do we even bring about these conversations within when we're already talking from a minoritized perspective, and we might also be in a minoritized perspective within others of the same, post position that we're in.
Absolutely. I do think it's a top-down conversation, right? Because what we do know and through research and, just experience with them in context of organizations, policies and procedures are top-down. They start from the top. So that's one of the things that I think is absolutely great about positive psychology coaching. So many, leaders have coaches, right? So if we start to look at embedding those are conversations that we can have with our clients as coaches that help shift that. And then when we start thinking about, doing the trainings and that type of stuff, I think that having the conversation to actually understand the value and the benefit that it adds for all of us. If we have diverse policies and we start to open the door for that and we actually change and shift the connotation around it, I think it's an easier, more digestible way to implement it.
Yeah, no, great point, great point. I'm going to step back
Can I
and
can I
let
jump
Dr.
in really quickly to piggyback off of that really quickly because I don't want to lose that train of thought. Because as you were presenting, I'm really heavy on the system stuff right now and thinking about what's happening from a system perspective. So to piggyback, but PERMA, right? And even the JVR are psychological frameworks that describe individual well-being. It's my understanding, right? They're psychological frameworks that mostly look at individual well-being and job resources, is my understanding. And but burnout, as you keep alluding to, has very structural roots, right? Workplace inequity, as you talked about, racialized expectations, right? As I think we've identified systemic overwork, all of these things. So how does positive psychology coaching address does it fix burnout if the system itself is broken? Can positive psychology coaching fix burnout if the system itself is broken? And how do you think your model um or data address these kind of broader systemic factors?
Yeah, so I think it's a multifaceted approach, right? So I think that yes, the simple answer to your question is yes. Can it fix burnout within an organizational context? I think either model can actually be adapted to a organizational. So it is you can look at it through the lens of individual well-being, but it also is looking at when you take a look and go, how are we as an organization, as a team, as a group looking at, building positive emotion within the workspace. So I think it has implications for shifting workplace culture and not just for the individual. And the same thing when we take a look at the JDR model, it looks at what those job demands are, and then what are the resources that replenish it. So when I'm thinking about it and what I looked at and what my study, the participants in my study, what they yielded was that it gave them the space to really be able to think about who they were in that space and really find the strengths that they bring. And I think if we start to embed that within the workspace, and that is done as a cultural shift, it no longer it is just an individual responsibility. And I think that's what we have to move away from, is just treating the individual that's experiencing burnout and shifting and looking at the systems that are creating it and upholding that.
Thank you. I'm gonna turn it to Dr. Ramsey, but that was powerful because again, when I think of positive psychology, I think about the individual, but I think part of what many of us are looking at is that, but the system is broken, right? The system itself is broken. And so does this fix? So I think that was helpful. Dr. Ramsey, I'm turning it to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karma. So good. Chef's kiss. I'm so excited for you. Uh, so I really want to know because along the lines of what we are already discussing, I do believe that as you know, I believe that you identify with your population that you are researching through. And so what I want to know is that how did your own background, your beliefs, your lived experiences influence how you made sense of this data?
Yeah, so, I was very careful about that, because I do understand I am a Black woman. I have experienced burnout. I've been a lead, like, all of the things. But I made really sure that, I engaged in reflexive journaling, and I wanted to make sure that I separated my experience and what I thought it meant. And so I was very careful in the questions that I asked, the way that I went about conducting the interviews, that it truly only focused on their experiences so that I could repeat back in the literature what was their experience, not mine. So I definitely did the work before and after on either side just to make sure that I was clear with what was mine, what I felt versus what I heard from the participants, and even through my, data analysis as I continued to re-listen. And I made sure that I it's really set in their transcripts, hearing it in their voices so that I got it from them and not what I felt or what I thought it meant for me.
That's good. No, I know that it can, if you believe so much in what we do, it can kind of get a little hairy. So that process is very much needed. So I'm glad that you were able to do that. You cited a couple key studies in your research, which I loved reading. Which one of those studies strongly influenced your research design? And did it challenge you any way, or was there any challenges with the research that you studied in relation to your study right now?
Yes, I don't think there was one that necessarily had a larger impact than the other, because for me, what I found was there is not a lot of research out here on this topic, right? So what I had to do was take multiple studies to put them together to make this one study. And initially, I thought like I would find something that was pretty similar and then I would be able to model my study after it and then, go from there. And what I found is, I mean, this conversation is just not in the literature as it should be, and it has not been looked at in this way. So, it invigorated me though, I can be honest, because it said, okay, if it's not there, then I feel like it's a responsibility that I have to make sure it is. So which is what pushed me more, to actually really dive in and do this. So I didn't have one study that did, but I pulled from multiple studies to really look at. And initially, I was just looking at using the PERMA framework, just because I mean, I know the impact that it has. But when I came across the job demands resource, I felt like it spoke really pointly to a lot of the things that we are doing. Like there are these things, the cultural taxation. When we think about the number of Black women that had this DEI initiative, right? But that is not a part. That's a separate part of their role. They're still expected to get all of these things done. They're a lot of times the head of the ERGs and all of that type of stuff. So these are those invisible parts of labor that are there. They're part of the job demands, but what are the resources that actually help mitigate that and replenish them as leaders?
Yeah, no, I think your study is so spot on because it's so needed because the research is not there. And so my last question, I got tons more, but See, I'll make this my last question. How has actually conducting this research transformed your perspective as a scholar practitioner? Because now you've moved into the whole scholar practitioner realm of things. And so I want to know how doing this study has transformed you.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I think being a practitioner first, it was like you hear the stories, I have the clients, all of that. But now that I'm thinking about it through this lens and I'm looking for research, I'm like, yeah, we need more of this. So I think the transformation for me is now when I'm reading anything, I'm looking at where are these implications for marginalized groups? Like where are we not hearing the voices or being able to cite what needs to be said because we just haven't heard the participants' voices enough to be able to share what's meaningful for them. So I think that's the way it's kind of increased as a scholar. And I think as a practitioner, I'm even more committed to doing the work that we do to help make everybody's experience of, reducing burnout and just leading with a more well space.
Awesome. We need it. We need you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Luda.
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, so Karma, one of the things I was thinking about that as you know, we've talked. This is something I'm very passionate about, something that's very present, real reality for me and so many other women, especially women of color. But your story integrates the PERMA plus and job demands resources model, and you show how positive psychology can act as a resource that helps to buffer burnout for African American women leaders, right? But what I
Mhm.
was wondering was, based on your findings, do you think that there are under what conditions, right? Under what conditions or what organizational um demands maybe might the buffering effect not hold, right? So what I started to think about was could there be organizational demands? Could there be work demands, right? So organizational demands, or could the demands be so high at an organization or the organizational culture itself so misaligned that even the perma plus practices would not be enough to prevent exhaustion? And if so, what would Karma Hill propose for the future? If you had to come up with something, what would you propose for that? Because, I just started to think about like just different organizations where I've been at that it's so misaligned or the demands are so high. I mean, they're just so high that I started to wonder, what if this couldn't even work in that situation because of this misalignment?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. And funny enough, I had one of the participants in my study. What I feel like positive psychology coaching helped her with was the value alignment and then the boundaries piece for her. And from that, she was able to recognize that it didn't matter what she did, that the space wasn't going to change. So she
Mhm.
needed to shift spaces. But I think that's the empowerment piece.
I like
And for me, that is more what I recommend. You have to first, you have autonomy. You have to decide what works best for you, but having the space where you can actually be affirmed and you understand you're not the problem. Because a lot of times it's, now you're on a pit and you're looking at, okay, what's wrong with me? But when you can align with yourself and you know your values, you can set your boundaries and you can be very clear on who you are and what you bring. And you're looking at things through a strength-based perspective. You can then decide, like, is this the space for me? And where do I need to be? And in that job seeking, you're empowered to find your voice and find your space where you're most aligned. So that's where I think the recommendation is because no, I don't think it's a one size fits all. I don't think it can fix everything. I think it's multi-layered and we have so much work to do. But what I do know is just fixing yourself is not enough. We do have to do the cultural piece within the organization. So I think it's a multi-layered conversation to be had.
I like hearing that, and I think that's really important because I wanna say that if we look at, especially women of color, right? And all of the barriers, so often that voice is taken away, right? So often when they're in those settings, they don't have that voice, so you're not even sure, "Can I leave this? Am I supposed to leave this? What is next?" And so I like that empowerment piece. and helping find direction. I think my other question for you, I've constantly asked Karma, what's next? What's next? What's next? What are you doing with this degree? Right? Because you already are operating so much in this space. And I see the things that you're doing. You've been on podcasts, you're presenting, you're doing a lot of phenomenal things. So I think I know your findings are so powerful, Karma. And they have real potential, as Dr. Pasha noted and Dr. Ramsey, to shape leadership and wellness programs. So my question for you is this: if an organization brought you in tomorrow and said, "We love your study, help us use it. We love your study, help us use it," was one specific doable thing, right, that you'd implement first that could actually start reducing burnout? What's one thing from your study that you would implement first?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would say would be to look at doing a cultural audit to see where your practices lie. And then the second recommendation I definitely would have would be to meet with the leaders so that they could start that coaching process. So a lot of those tough conversations could be had so we can start to unpack to do the work because there's so much work to be done. You first have to get the buy-in of the people who are the decision makers. So that would be my first thing, auditing the organization to just see where your practices are, because I think if you're not aware of how you're operating, you can't really change it.
Great. I want to open it back up to see if Dr. Pasha or Dr. Ramsey have any other questions for you.
I
Yeah.
would,
Yeah, go ahead, Green. No. You first, because they're so interesting. So you first.
I would love to know that if you were to replicate the study, would you do anything different? And if so, what would that be?
I think having more participants probably, of course, only strengthens the findings and, opens the door for that. So, I mean, that was that. Other than that, I would love at some point to be able to do a study where, you know, you had set frameworks. For this one, the criteria was just that participants had coaching with 3 positive psychological interventions. And so we named those. But I would love to see a more systematic way of going about it. I think that could be, room for an additional study for somebody else who wants to pick up, where I left off.
Or you?
Right. Or me.
Okay.
So mine is actually going a little bit back to what Dr. Luter was talking about. I had actually made a note of this, and so I'm glad. Thank you for allowing us to ask another question because I had a note that wanted to ask about this because one of the things that you pointed out, which I thought was really powerful, was that organizations need to align their KPIs and performance measures with actual well-being measures. So I'm thinking from, let's say, a performance management perspective, what what might you change or how might you integrate those well-being facets into that kind of a performance measure, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, how might you actually implement it?
Yeah, so I think that we have to give the qualitative piece a voice. And we need to know, like, what are those invisible labors that people are experiencing within the workspace? And of course, that's for African American women, but that's for all leaders. Everybody is coming with something. So I think when we are measuring outcome, performance, what's actually happening, we cannot omit the causation of some of it. What are the things that we're not seeing? When we think about, at least for this population, the advocacy piece, when you think about constantly having to prove yourself because the thought and the perception is that you don't know enough, or, what is that doing to people when they come into the space? And that was a lot of what I heard from the participants is that, they felt like they had to work, twice as hard. And that's labor, right? But that's not measured anywhere. Or if we think about, hey, we're taking on these initiatives, and you're ERG leaders and you're doing all of this, but that's not actually part of your job. So when you get to the KPIs, no one ever even asks you about how that's impacting you. But that's still a weight that you're carrying to move this, I guess, your belief in this space forward. And I think we need to measure all of what leaders are doing, employees in general, but this was specifically about leadership. So I think the qualitative piece, adding that to the KPIs, is how we can start to move that forward.
Yeah, no, I think, and that kind of aligns with what you were saying earlier about having that cultural audit, because once you've actually identified some practices, then you could add to your performance measures something that would be concrete, like an actual question or questions that would address these things. So yeah, very good. Thank you so much, Karma. That was really,
Thank
really great.
you. Thank you.
One of the things, I'm an international psychologist. I work in the international psychology department, and so I always have to throw my international lens on, especially because I also teach business at a university that has all international students in their MBA program, right? And so they come from different cultures and backgrounds, and we often talk about the difference in cultural context, right? So in your framing of emotional intelligence and even resilience, to what extent do you think it is? To what extent do you think this framing is implicitly Western, right, or individualistic? And how might a cross-cultural or non-Western lens, such as collectivist, right, leadership traditions, complicate or maybe enrich your model and what you're looking at? Because I started to think about how would this be used in different cultures, right? That's more collectivist, not so individualistic. Or we have other, dynamics in that culture, but non-Western cultures.
Yeah, I think a collectivist model actually only enhances some of that, right? Because when we think about operating with cultural humility and really looking at what, from a strength-based perspective, what are you bringing to the table? That is about everybody. That isn't a this way is right and your way is wrong. So when I think about societies and other non-Western traditions and ways that people operate, I think that it can only enhance this because we are looking at bringing all voices to the table and not having individuals fit into a one size fit all versus a how do we all bring all the strengths that we have together collectively to move this organization, this mission, this whatever it is, we can move this forward together versus as an individual. So I think it enhances in many ways, some non-Western practices.
I agree. I see that. I agree. I mean, I think we have to definitely continue to, and I think some of it comes back to, when you talked about the one woman who recognized that the organization was just not aligned, right? Was misalignment. I think part of it also, what it sounds like in your coaching is that even if, there's a lot of personal empowerment that's happening in that as well, right? And a lot of identity almost development, and so in that I think it also helps people hopefully become more culturally intelligent and understand how do I operate in this system, or like you said, or I'm just not able to operate in this system and it's not the right system for me. But I agree, I think it's something to look at, especially as we are at the height of globalization, and not just people migrating to the states, but so many people from the states, right? And especially you talk about women of color migrating other spaces, right? And they're going to operate in other spaces. And even though they may be leaving the states, you still have then you're going into other cultural contexts, right? And so now we have gender dynamics that can be different, hierarchy is very different, for example, here in the States, we operate in most companies, most organizations, I think in the States are very open door policy, right? And when you get into some other countries, there's this hierarchy that's very rigid. And so I think if nothing else, it helps people to kind of develop and understand, how do I adapt to this? How do I continue to find my voice and find my space and place in this, or not.
Or not. No.
Yeah, or not. Any further questions, Doctor? I mean, I think we could have, and this is a good thing, because I think this is very intriguing, and I don't believe that our conversations will stop here. I think we could probably go back and forth and talk with you again and again and again about this. I will say, Karma, and you know how I feel. I don't believe that education should be performative, right? I believe that we're doing this for a greater call, right? What is our contribution to humanity? And I think this is this to me speaks to the elephant in the room. because so many times um, there's not that voice of acknowledging. There's not that voice of acknowledging these experiences and what this is like, and there is this, and even amongst each other, there's not that acknowledgement. It's almost like let me just smile and grin and bear and just sit here and try to survive. And I think this is really important because it speaks to larger organizational challenges, but even cultural challenges, global challenges, and challenges within our society. Because when we have leaders that are challenged in ways, and these are not met in organizations, it trickles down, right? It trickles down to families, communities, systems. Any final questions? And then we can open it up to the general public really quickly to see if there are any questions, but we will deliberate in a moment. Let's sort out deliberation. No. Are there any questions from the public before the committee steps out for one moment for deliberation? But we want to open it up. Please off cameras in case there are any questions from anyone in the public. Okay, then Carla, I'm going to ask you to place us in a breakout room, and the committee will be back in a moment. We will join everyone back in a few moments. We will step away for a moment to deliberate. Karma, congratulations. You absolutely passed. You did a phenomenal job. It has been an honor to just see you move forward through this. And I think we're more excited because of the work that you're going to do, right? When a dissertation, a lot of times I know your students are exhausted and they want to feel like, oh, it's over. And I say it's just beginning, right? It's just beginning because we do this for the good work that we're doing. I have been deeply moved. I watched Jane Goodall did an interview that she did prior to her death, but they didn't post it on Netflix until after she died. So it just aired 2 nights ago. And I was deeply moved because she talked about our call for humanity, our call to not be quiet, our call to be women, right? Who dare to challenge the status quo. And so that's what, as your chair, that's what I call you to do. Don't let this end here. We're looking forward to publications. We're looking forward to continued work because this is so needed, but phenomenal job. And um, just for me and on behalf of your committee, you absolutely passed.
Thank you.
Dr. Hill, welcome. Dr. Hill.
Dr. Hill, congratulations.
Congratulations, Dr. Hill.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And this is, it's of course, it's not gonna end for me. This is something I'm truly passionate about. So, I mean, for me, I'm probably like Jane Goodall, work I'll continue to do, for the rest of my life, just because I feel like it's so meaningful and it has so many impacts, not just in the workspace, but because we take us everywhere we go and it impacts us as a society. So anybody knows we talk to me long enough, I can get started and go on and on about it, but it's truly meaningful work. And, I'm super excited because I get to do some of this work in spaces like I'm a part of Black Women Leading, which is Laura Knights that's on the phone. And then Sinette is one of the coaches, Dr. Chanasa, Coach Deborah. We got a ton of people on it, and then I'm part of the positive psychology group and just other coaches. I just know that this work is meaningful and that we can actually change the world by continuing to do it.
So I'm going to reach out to you soon. I'm going to be reaching out to you, Dr. Hill, because I am putting together for my other job, I'm putting together a class on positive organizations. And a lot of what you are talking about, I put over here because I was like, I need to go back and talk to Dr. Hill and get some specific ideas on how to or make sure that we have these minoritized, perspectives included in that, because otherwise it's not positive at all.
right,
I want you to make sure that somehow we work on getting it published,
Absolutely.
whether it's journals or, I mean, I feel a book coming on, because I think that this perspective is absolutely necessary, not just needed, necessary. So
Yeah.
Congratulations.
I'm gonna connect you. I'm writing a chapter in a book. It's women leaders and scholars all over the world, and they identify as women of color, primarily Black women, but women of color leaders and scholars. And when I tell you they found me in Kuwait, but they're all over the world, and we're writing this book about what those experiences are. I think this would be a wonderful group for your next work and when you're publishing to connect you with them because we each are assigned a chapter to write just about some of this. So this is
Oh,
powerful.
yes.
Right.
Please. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes. Well, you did it.
You did it. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations,
Dr. Hill.
Dr. Hill.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And
You shake it. You made the committee. Thank you. 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 Have a phenomenal committee.
yeah, yeah. I wouldn't be here without y'all. So I know. Let's.
Celebrate. Go celebrate. Forget
Yes,
us.
no celebrate. So good as you say. To everyone else, I want to thank you. I believe that it takes a village. Karma didn't get here by accident, and everybody who showed up, all of these amazing leaders and scholars, and everybody who showed up to support her, that's a part of that village. That's a part of this work. And so, on behalf of Chicago School, on behalf of our new Dr. Hill, Karma Hill, and the committee, we want to thank you all for your support. Go celebrate.
Thank
Talked
you.
about this
Thank
day.
you all. Yes. Thank you all. I love y'all. I appreciate y'all for being here and supporting me throughout. This truly is my village. So I appreciate you all. Thank
Thank
you.
you. I'm gonna send Miss L an email with you, and we'll get that form filled out. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Perfect. Thank you all, so
Thank you.
everything. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, have a
Great
great
night.
Hi, everyone.